Alright, welcome back to It's Not a Sport, Season 2, Episode 26. I am your host, Salty Waffles, and as always, we got a lot of good, juicy news to end off the year. So, just a disclaimer, this episode will be all about the news that's coming out this year, what's kind of coming out, and it's just wrapping up the year with the news. Next episode will be more my take on the games, and I really want to spend this time to talk about how esports went for this year as well. So expect somewhat of a long episode because there's been a lot to cover over the last couple of weeks. So, like always, we're going to start off with esports, starting off with League of Legends. So, right now, before I get into Worlds, because that's what I really want to talk about, I want to note that most esports leagues are now in their preseason, which means that there are a ton of roster swaps happening, a ton of, changes going on within the scene, and just overall everything's going to be completely different when it comes to which team and which players are on that team, starting in which organizations are coming back into the scene, starting next split. And that goes for both Overwatch and League of Legends. I'm not going to cover all of those. I will cover the roster changes when they are final and the season starts. So in Season 3 of It's Not a Sport. Because right now, it's just rumors and some announcements. And I could go over all those, but honestly, it would take forever because there's so much to cover. Some of the esports industries that are coming in, though, is Dignitas has a joint ownership of Clutch Gaming, I believe, and Clutch may rebrand to Dignitas. You can see they already had their color palette if you looked at them last split, but they may rebrand just straight up to Dignitas. The other partner is, I believe, the Houston Rockets. And other than that, Evil Geniuses, I think, is coming back as well. And Immortals, I think, is also coming back. I don't know if they're being added to the LCS or different leagues, but I believe those are also teams that are kind of returning to League of Legends esports scene. There's also some really big Griffin controversy going over in Korea about players' contracts. I thought that while we're on this topic, talk about this a little bit. Essentially, some players got under really bad false contracts, and there's been a huge investigation, and there's a lot of criminal charges going on over there with Griffin. Riot fined Griffin. They banned the former coach and Griffin's director from doing business with League of Legends in general. So a lot of controversy with the organization Griffin over contracts. Some of the stuff that was wrong in this contract was if you get sick or you can't play for 30 days, then they have a right to terminate your contract. If you decline in performance, which they dictate what performance is, then you can get terminated in your contract. So things like that are just kind of outrageous. I guess Korean lawyers are kind of concerning it to early K-pop scenes where they get into these slave contracts, but it's super interesting, and I will continue to follow it and update it as it goes along. Other than that, also with League of Legends, preseason started. So if you don't know what preseason is, it's the time where in the game actually Riot makes a whole bunch of changes to the game to try to keep it new and fresh, and it's kind of a new game. There's a lot of changes. We can talk about that later, but right now let's get into Worlds. So the finals of Worlds was FunPlus Phoenix versus G2, China versus EU, and it was a complete stomp on FunPlus Phoenix side. They completely destroyed G2. It was kind of hard to watch. I didn't even really watch all the games because it was just so difficult to watch how bad G2 was playing. But I thought that it wasn't them playing bad, it was them being unprepared. I felt that when I was watching this series, for instance, G2 went into the series thinking, oh, you know, it's like every other series. We can just easily, you know, roll through the team, you know, because we're just that good. You know, we're the kind of reformed League of Legends as we know it, and we can just completely stomp through this, you know, this matchup. They didn't go at this finals seriously, essentially, is what I'm saying. They went at it as like, oh, we're just gonna win, you know, we're that good. We don't need to really try. We don't need to even think about anything. And that's how it kind of felt when they were playing and then when they were drafting. And Fun Plus Phoenix went in like, oh, this is the finals. We're serious as fuck. We're gonna win this shit. And that's how. And then the two different kind of mentalities kind of show through the gameplay, and just how Fun Plus Phoenix was just like forcing things like super aggressively and like throughout the game with like the dives on top lane, and G2 wasn't really doing anything else. They were super close games. Like G2 definitely could have won, but I don't think they really wanted the win. They weren't hungry enough as much as Fun Plus Phoenix was. And that's why Fun Plus Phoenix won. So congratulations to Fun Plus Phoenix for winning the World Championship of 2019. There were some crazy games. Overall, I thought the championship was it was somewhat boring for me personally. I think it's always really cool. Don't get me wrong. It's always really cool to see people play internationally, because we don't get a lot of international tournaments. And the viewership peaked at like 300 views with the SKT versus G2 game, which is actually more than the finals and more than last year. But overall, the tournament itself was just kind of boring. I think the meta itself wasn't really that interesting, so to speak. Like, I think last year's meta was more interesting because it just resolved around these three picks: Akali, Aatrox, and Aurelia. So people had to come up with more strategies to defeat those picks, so to speak, and which priorities to speak. Or which priority picks you want to pick when it came to drafting, when it came to playing, and when it came to strategizing. But this tournament overall was just like Bam Pantheon or Pickett. Bot lane just picks either Kai'Sa or Xayah, and mid lane you pick whatever the fuck. Jungler you pick like someone aggressive jungler, and top lane you can pick someone either of a carry top laner. So it wasn't really all that interesting overall, and there weren't really that any new cool strategies that came out of it, which was kind of disappointing. Why I thought it was kind of hard to watch compared to previous worlds. Even though Ardent was a terrible meta, we saw like some amazing strategies, and to me that would always be one of the best worlds. So in conclusion, Fun Plus Phoenix, congratulations on winning the World Championship. This year's Worlds was it was good to watch internationally, but it wasn't, I think, fantastic. And that basically concludes League of Legends. I think that going on into next season, however, it's going to be very interesting to see how pro players use the map, especially junglers. Because with these XP changes that they did, with the map changes that they did, and the dragon changes, essentially Riot did what I always say that they do, is they make the game faster, and they definitely made the game faster with the dragon priority, and like there's more win conditions compared to previous years with the 4th dragon and Elder Dragon and Baron. So they definitely made the game faster, which they keep doing every year. But the way that the map changes, it's gonna be interesting to see how teams utilize that to their advantage, especially in preseason. There's been some tournaments going on. For instance, Twitch Rivals just ended. If you want to go watch the VODs of that, you can. It's kind of a fun, Twitch streamer tournament with former or current like pros and streamers. They play, but it wasn't all that important. Really, I'm really excited to see what next year of esports has, gameplay wise, because at least for League, it's going to be really interesting with these changes in preseason. For the Overwatch League, I think it's going to be interesting because Overwatch 2 is kind of kind of being prepared, which I assume is going to come out next year. So are they going to start changing the multiplayer for Overwatch 2 and being prepared for that, or not? Because I think Overwatch is a very interesting case where Blizzard has invested heavily into the esports scene, but they haven't really done anything with the game. The game's still kind of in a shit state, in a shit stagnated state. Maybe I'll bring on Kane for more of this. He's been playing a lot more Overwatch than I have, but the game itself hasn't really changed over the years, other than maybe more shields. So Overwatch is a very interesting case. So that's going to cover the esports section. Now let's get into some of the game releases and, most importantly, all the game news. Alright, so in the gaming news and release of the November 2019, where we left off, Death Stranding came out, Red Dead Redemption 2 came out, Just Dance 2020 came out, Pokemon Sword and Shield, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order is what we're going to be talking about right now. And then we're going to go a little bit further into the future with December. Halo Reach will be coming out on the Xbox One and PC on December. Oh, it comes out in December. It says December 3rd on here, but I think it comes out on PC on like the 11th. And then that's pretty much going to wrap up the year, so to speak. And Life is Strange Episode 5, I think, is a noteworthy release date as well. So out of those games, those are kind of the big games that are wrapping up this year: Pokemon, Star Wars, and Halo. Let's just go down the list of those games, because I think that's a perfect segue into this. So Pokemon, as we know, has been gotten a lot of controversy recently with the Sword and Shield release. First of all, it's called Dexit, which they cut a lot of Pokemon from these games. It's actually absurd how many. I think the smarter move would have been to split them. So Sword gets, half the Pokédex and Shield gets the other half, would be the smart move. But they didn't do that. They just decided to cut a shit ton of Pokemon. It's been mixed reviews. Some people love it. Some people say it's the best Pokemon game ever, and some people don't. I think some people are kind of tired of the formula, and they're pissed that what they got wasn't anything fantastic or new. So let's get into the point of Dexit. So Dexit, they removed all the Pokemon, or not all of them, but a majority of them, and and all the legendaries to note. And the reason they did this was they said that they didn't have a lot of time. They want to focus on animations and bring up the quality of the game, essentially. And it turned out that the animations are fucking terrible. The models are the same models from the DS games, just up to scale. And they really didn't put in any work in the game. There was this review. This dude did a review, and I was watching it. He was saying his argument was essentially that Pokemon is Nintendo's most stale product. It's stuck in a time where nothing's changed, and it's true. If you look at how Mario back in the 80s and the 90s compared to like Mario 64 to Mario Odyssey now, how that franchise has evolved throughout the years. If you look at Zelda to Ocarina of Time to Breath of the Wild, how that franchise has evolved throughout the years and has grown with its audience, how they fixed a lot of the gameplay mechanics of it, how they've added new gameplay mechanics of it, how the characters are really interesting, the story generally is the same but still really interesting journey. Mostly for me, I'm thinking of Odyssey and Breath of the Wild, two fantastic Nintendo games, right? And then you get your first mainline Pokemon game on the Switch, and Nintendo's actual console, which can run, Doom and even like The Witchers now, and it looks beautiful on Mario Odyssey and Breath of the Wild, and it can run these, powerful games. And you get this Pokemon game, and the graphics are really bad. You know, they're basic, you know, at best. The storytelling's really bad, where there's no voice acting. It's still just like text boxes. There's no real cutscenes, I guess, in the game. I haven't played it. This is, of course, from what I was getting from this dude's review, which I can agree from just gameplay. How the battle system itself hasn't evolved over the years. It's still just basic turn-based, and who can do super effective moves over and over again. Where now in turn-based strategy games, we look at games like Xenoblade Chronicles 2 with action turn-based kind of strategy, or Persona 5. Like, that's probably the most best modern case of turn-based combat. Or even like the gameplay for how Square Enix is doing Final Fantasy VII Remake and their kind of turn-based action combat. Just like that field has developed, and Pokemon's gameplay as fundamentals hasn't. How the game is super easy in general, that hasn't, basically overall, Pokemon itself hasn't grown with its audience. So it's been a mix of, you know, feedback, where some people are like, oh, this is fantastic, I really, you know, am enjoying this Pokemon. But overall, I think that the game hasn't developed itself. It hasn't, it's playing too safe. And I thought that, like, when I heard that it was going to be a mainline Pokemon game, I was like, oh my god, on the Switch? Well, I loved what they did with Sword and Shield. I can only imagine how much, you know, this game's going to change with the Switch as its, you know, base power. And, you know, what are they going to do? They can do voice acting now. They can do story stuff, you know, so much more potential. And then as more content comes out, as they start actually showing off the game with, like, now you just get giant Pokemon battles, you know, Pokemon just get really big. It got really disappointing for me. I didn't want to pick it up at all. At this point, it's not even on my list of games I want to play, which I'm super disappointed in. So that's kind of the gist of Pokemon. I'm sure that if it's still a good game, it's still sold extremely well in Japan and in other countries as well. So I'm sure that it's still a super, you know, well-refined game. But I think why people are mad is because it's not what it could have been. It's not what it should have been. Game Freak didn't really do anything with it. They just kind of pumped out new Pokemon, and it is gonna sell. It's one of the biggest IPs in the world. But here's the thing: if you don't try to innovate, which you should always try to do in your games, you kind of end up like Call of Duty. Call of Duty releases a game every year, right? Modern Warfare has done really well because they tried some new stuff. You know, they tried to mix up the formula. They tried to bring it back to what it used to do. There used to be, right? And they kind of did this every year with Call of Duty, but not too much. And now this new Modern Warfare has done really well. We see this with Nintendo games, right? We see this with League of Legends and MMOs, and they're always trying to innovate and make things better. And that's what you should do, especially when it's like, and I'm not saying you have to do this all the time. Pokemon could release the same type of formula for the next, you know, like 5-6 years. But when it comes to like 20 years or so, it needs to grow up with its audience. You know, it needs to still appeal to the children, but you need to try new things, is what I'm saying. And this game didn't really do it. The more I kind of saw it, is it kind of failed. It was going towards that direction when it had like the Mega Evolutions, but now with like the new Gigamax system, it's kind of a turnoff and just not really there for me. Alright, so now that we covered Pokemon, let's get into Star Wars. Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order has been very well received, surprisingly. Respawn actually, I think, knocked it out of the park with this one. I'm still personally a little disappointed that you can't cut people in half, but you can cut droids and animals in half. So, whatever. The game itself, It takes place 5 years after Order 66, so 5 years after Revenge of the Sith Episode 3, and you follow a young Jedi who's in hiding, who has to come out of hiding after being found out and hunted down by Inquisitors, and you go on a journey with him. That's pretty much all I know about it. I've only seen like an hour of footage, but the best way to describe this game is it is a mix between Dark Souls and Uncharted. It's very Dark Souls-y as in the combat, as in it's about pairing and attacking, and it's very Uncharted-y through like the adventure aspect of it, and you know, climbing up things, etc., etc. I'm actually this game actually, like, it's been on par for like The Force Unleashed, which was kind of like the solo experience Star Wars game, and it seems to be even better than that. When they first showed it, a lot of people were skeptical about this, especially with EA being involved, but they gave it to Respawn, which I think is a very smart idea, because I think Respawn is actually the best EA studio. They're the people who made Titanfall. They're the people who made Apex Legends. So they generally have a really good track record when it comes to making games, compared to DICE, which makes Battlefront and Battlefield, or whoever the fuck makes all the FIFA games. So putting them on this project to make this game was a really smart choice by EA, and they really came out on top. This game looks fantastic. The story looked really interesting. It's got an overall really good reviews, and it's definitely one of my games to play on the list. It's definitely also a really good time to release it, because next month the movie is supposed to be coming out, Rise of the Skywalker, which from footage I kind of have my problems with. I've had my problems with these new sequel of films. They've just been really kind of bad, in my opinion, like really fucking bad. Like all of them are really bad. But at this time, with releasing this bomb-ass game, and with Disney Plus launching, with The Mandalorian out, Star Wars has kind of been really good for me. Me and my friends went back and we watched all of them up to date, because a lot of my friends haven't really seen the Star Wars films. And, you know, just going back, nothing beats the originals, but these coming out and them doing so well makes me happy, because Star Wars is one of my favorite franchise, and seeing how good and well received Jedi Fallen Order is, and how good and well received The Mandalorian is, makes me really happy, because these new movies have been overall just bad. Just really, really bad. So I haven't played it. When I do, I will give you my full review on both Pokemon and Star Wars, as well as Death Stranding's on my list, Control's on my list, and Other Worlds is also on my list, and I will tell you why in a little bit. So now we're gonna move on into gaming news, because there is a lot of it. I'm just gonna start off with kind of some of the smaller stuff, right? So there's a new Saints Row rumored to be announced in 2020. Amazon wants to start their own streaming service for, like Google Stadia, which we'll get into next. But they want to start their own streaming service. We know this, that Amazon has also been trying to break into the gaming scene, because they have their own like independent studio that's supposed to be like developing, I think, a Lord of the Rings MMO, if I'm like not mistaken. So we know that Amazon's also been trying to break into the gaming industry. Disney Plus came out with The Mandalorian, which again we just talked about. It's been very well received. I've watched it. It's a very good show. I recommend to watch it if you haven't. Halo Reach is coming out for the PC very soon. It's the Master Chief Collection. I'm definitely looking forward to that. With the addition of a couple weeks ago, BlizzCon, Path of Exiles announced Path of Exiles 2 to be coming out, which should be coming out, I believe, sometime next year, which is a lot closer than Diablo 4. So that's that's really exciting if you're a Path of Exiles fan, to see that Path of Exiles 2 is coming out, because they're a really interesting company to be able to develop a game on that scale for free. And it's not, as big or has as big of lacking or backing as like League of Legends, but it's really interesting to see that. There's a new Half-Life game called Half-Life Alyx. It is developed by Valve. It's been like the first Valve game in a really long time. It's meant to sell Valve's VR system, is what it seems to be, because it is for VR. It's a Half-Life VR game, but it's really meant to sell the VR system, is what my thinking behind it. League of Legends news, preseason started again, the map changed, etc, etc. There's so many changes. I recommend you go follow that. There's a new champion that's supposed to be coming out next month, who has like 25 different weapons but only 3 buttons. He's super interesting as well. Go cover that. And then they also want to establish 2 new leagues in EU, the Dutch League and the Belgian League, presumably just to kind of split up EU's region a little bit, and then you'll probably get to LEC, which will be the big gaming service. So now let's get into Google Stadia. Google Stadia launched November 19th, and it's bad from what people have been saying, but that's kind of to be expected, that this was supposed to be a beta. So first off, about Google Stadia, the launch games are really kind of bad. So you get Assassin's Creed Odyssey with it. You get Destiny 2 with it. But Destiny 2 is free, so you get Farming Simulator with it. You get Final Fantasy 15, Football Manager, Grid, Glit, Just Dance 2020, Kind, Metro Exodus, Mortal Kombat 11, NBA 2K, Rage 2, Red Dead Redemption 2, Tomb Raider Trilogy, Wolfenstein Youngblood. And then there's games to be announced, like Cyberpunk is supposed to be for it, Doom Eternal, Ghost Recon Breaking Point, Watch Dogs Legions, Borderlands 3 is supposed to be coming out for it, Division 2, The Elder Scrolls Online, Super Hot. So like a lot of games are supposed to kind of, overall the launch is just bad, because a lot of these games, if you haven't already, you've probably played already. Rage 2 has been out for a while. Red Dead Redemption 2 has been out for a while. Final Fantasy 15 has been out for years. That game came out in 2016. Destiny 2 has been out for a really long time, and Assassin's Creed has been out for a really long time. So if you haven't played these games already, which you probably have, then Stadia is kind of just bad, because there's no new games coming out on it. The only new game that really sparked my interest that's coming out on this was Cyberpunk. So that's kind of the first problem with it, right? The second problem with it is that it's missing features. It's missing like a lot of like the features where like the social features, like the family play features, or like you're supposed to like see somebody stream it and then click it and play, and it'll just bring you to the game itself. So there's a lot of missing features that were promised with launch that aren't there. And then there's shipping delays. A lot of people's packages got delayed. And I don't even people who like work there, like their package just got delayed. And then probably the biggest problem is the cost. It's like $130 to get the controller and a Google Chromecast, I believe, and then it's like another like $10 a month for like Google Prime or Google Stadia Prime, which is like the streaming service, and then on top of that you have to buy the game, so it'll end up costing you a total of like $300-400 total just to play these games on streaming platforms, which at that point you might as well just buy a console And you know, because consoles are more stable, the old console generation is kind of rolling out because next year's holiday the new consoles are going to be here, and this is kind of all seeing a beta. Like a lot of people are just like, don't buy it unless like you want to be like at the tip top of, you know, technology. But overall, it's not worth it. Then you get to connections and just how it works in general. There's a lot of like delay in it. Like it's supposedly super laggy. There's delay with input times. So there's delay with input times, meaning once you hit a button or move the controller or sprint, it takes about maybe like a second or like half a second for it to actually do that action in the game. Which is not good when you're playing, you know, any sort of game. It doesn't feel good at all. So overall, this just seems to be a lot of problems with Google Stadia. One of the biggest concerns for developers and why we probably don't see a lot of games being developed for this platform is because Google has a history of axing things. There's a lot of projects that Google has started up and then just stopped because, you know, they didn't deem it successful or anything like that. So if you're putting time and resources into a platform that may be taken down at any moment, it's not really smart to develop games for this. So there's a lot of problematic things with Google Stadia at the moment. If I had my hands to test it, I would. I don't think I even have good enough internet to test it. I mean, maybe if I went right next to my router, but like with Wi-Fi and Ethernet, it seems to be very janky. Then there's the whole thing, like the whole big selling point of Google Stadia was that you were able to play it on your phone. But it only works with the select number of phones. It only works with like kind of like 5 Google Pixels, and those are like the newest Google Pixels. It doesn't work with Android phones or some Android phones. It doesn't work with iPhones at all. And then you have problems with like the whole the thing that's supposed to attach to the controller so you can play with your phone is sold separately on top of the $130 packet. So it's interesting. I think overall it's too early for its time. I don't think people are just like it's the same argument like the gaming industry. It's like, oh, the next big thing's gonna be mobile, which is why we see all these like newly invested in mobile games, which is true. With mobile games, you do reach a more general, broader audience than the hardcore audience. You know, instead of like 1,000 people, it becomes, you know, hundreds of people or 100,000s of people, or billions of people with their phones. Because most people have phones compared to, you know, $1,000 PC rig or a $300 console. So that's how it goes in theory, right? And it's the same with Google Stadia, where instead of spending $1,000 for this, you know, rig, you can just stream it all with your internet. But here's the problem: it's much more efficient and much more, probably at the end of the day, cost efficient just to build your PC and just to like own a console than to and be at the top end of the line in technology than doing this janky Google Stadia stuff and, you know, mobile. You got to think of it as an investment. For instance, when I buy a mattress, right, or a car, which is like, you know, thousands of dollars, right? You don't just buy it and use it once. It's not a one-time use. You buy it and it stays with you for, you know, couple 5-6 years. Maybe you upgrade it, maybe you exchange it, maybe you change one piece out for the other, and you improve upon it. It's an investment. Same with the house, you know. That's why these things are expensive, because they're investments overall. But when it comes to, you know, streaming as a service, it's just not there yet. It's not there yet. I don't think anybody really wants it, subscription based. There's a lot of subscription things right now out there. A lot of people don't have a lot of money for the subscriptions on top of those games. So Google Stadia is just, I think, too early. There's other also streaming platforms out there. I believe there's one called Shadow, which is out there, which also just has a better baseline setup than Google Stadia. Overall, there's one more last thing I want to talk about before we conclude this week's show. Every year, the Game Awards does a little, nominees for the best game of the year, and you can currently go on their website and vote. The stream itself and the award ceremony will take place on December 12th, so the 12th of next month. I will go into this more on our last show, which will be next week, kind of summing up the year for me in terms of gaming. This one kind of summed up, I hope, esports for you and for me, and what I thought about esports overall. I thought it was a good year, but we can definitely do better. So some of the nominations, just to get over it, for Game of the Year, we have Control, Death Stranding, Resident Evil 2 Remake, Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, and The Outer Worlds for Game of the Year. And then we have a whole bunch of other categories like audio design, community support, content creator of the year, esports coach, etc., etc. And I will go over all of that for me personally in the next episode. But I thought that if you wanted to vote, which I think you definitely should, go out there and vote. It's definitely always fun to see, which game will be Game of the Year. I want to play those games to see why it will be Game of the Year as well. Anyway, that's going to conclude this week's show. Thank you for listening. I hope you're having a wonderful holiday. If you want to listen to all of our past shows, they're up on our YouTube, or if you or on SoundCloud, iTunes, Spotify, and Google Podcasts as well. Make sure to visit our website and follow us on social media. On Instagram, It's Not a Sport to You. This has been your host, Salty Waffles, signing off, and I hope you guys are having a wonderful climb.